Today's daf we're going to learn is Bava Kamma daf Pei Zayin. We are going to get started. There's a study guide for today. It actually starts from the second or the bottom of Amud Aleph. It's the part that more needed a chart. We are going to get started with the bottom of, very, very bottom of Pei Vav Amud Bet. So we started with this unique opinion of Rabbi Yehuda about a summa, a blind person. And Rabbi Yehuda started to tell us that assuming there's no boshet, you don't pay if you humiliate them, or perhaps there is no such thing as them humiliating other people, perhaps both. And then he went on to say that there's all sorts of other laws that they are excluded from a blind person. So they don't get galut if they accidentally kill someone, they don't get lashes, and they don't get killed by the court. And he showed, right, the Gemara showed us drashot where Rabbi Yehuda gets it from. Now we're going to have two more braitot about Rabbi Yehuda that both start with this law that according to Rabbi Yehuda, there is no boshet, and then goes on to say, and there's also something that they're not included in. Tanya Ida. Another braita says, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, summa ein lo boshet, v'chein haya Rabbi Yehuda potro mikol dinim shebetorah. Now, dinim shebetorah means judgment, okay? Judgment related to dinim mamono. We already said they don't get lashes. We already said they don't get mito beitin. They don't get killed by the court. They also can't get convicted by the court. They can't, according to the commentaries here, they can't go to judgment. They can't be a prosecutor or defendant. They can't be on either side, really. And they also can't be a judge. Where does he get this from? In the psukim about in Sefer Bamidbar at the end, when it talks about the Ir Miklat, the refuge city, it says, and the people will judge between the one who killed and the relative, meaning what really happened here. Was it an intentional death? Was it an unintentional death? Al hamishpatim ha'ele. So now they say, well, the word mishpatim usually means judgment, monetary law. So kol sheyesh no b'ma, and what does that have to do with anything here? Now, again, it's not the simple reading of this pasuk, it's a drasha. Anyone who's subject to the laws of murder or accidental murder, will also be part of the monetary law. And anyone who's not is not going to be a mishpatim either. So from there we learn this parallel between the two. So therefore, if they're exempt from all the other things we said before, the chayvei galuyot and the chayvei mito beitin, then they're also going to be exempt from monetary law as well. Tanya Ida, another braita. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, summa ein lo boshet, again, starting with this boshet issue. V'chein haya Rabbi Yehuda potro mikol mitzvot hamurah b'Torah. Now we go even farther. Excuse me. The summa is exempt from all mitzvot in the Torah. There's a big, bold statement. And there's a big debate about how to understand this. Does he mean all positive commandments? Does he mean just Torah commandments, not rabbinic commandments? And did he really believe to exempt a summa from everything? It's a very good question. Nobody really knows the answer to this. And on what basis would we exempt a blind person? Now, Rav Lichtenstein Zatzal used to talk about the fact that you can look at this in two ways. Is the exemption that Rabbi Yehuda sees fit for a blind person, is it because he has a disability, and because of a disability, we want to make his life easier and say, well, we understand you're blind and you have some difficulties, so let's exempt you from all the mitzvot to make it easier? Or is it because he viewed him in the category of shoteh katan, someone who doesn't have da'at, halachic knowledge and understanding, and then basically they're just not part of the world of mitzvah? So there's no good answer to that question. It is hard to imagine that he really viewed them as bardat, because we see all over the Gemara, we're going to see it right now, there were great Talmidei Chachamim who were blind. So to say they're not bardat is very difficult. Either Rabbi Yehuda lived in a place where there weren't these blind rabbanim, and maybe he didn't know people who were blind who were great scholars. The main ones we know about Rabbi Yehuda, Rav Yosef, Rav Sheshet, they were later and they were in Babylonia. Rabbi Yehuda's earlier and in Eretz Yisrael. It's a very good question. We don't know. So this raises a whole bunch of questions. In general, we don't hold Lakim, although there are certain things that come up, some sugiot, that there's issues about blind people, like, for example, aliyot l'Torah. But again, over the years, the perspective has changed about this, and seems like nowadays nobody would really view this any different. A blind person is any different in terms halakhically, in terms of any sort of issues, although, like everything, there's different opinions about it. So it's a very interesting topic. You can research it. It's not so hard to find articles about it and things written from a more modern perspective, and not even just modern. This is already many, many years ago. The perspective had changed. And again, also, Rabbi Yehuda in general is a dat yachid. And what the issue with Kriyat Torah and Aliyah Torah, separate issue. And I'm not going to go into all this right now, but super interesting topic. So now we have, so that's Rabbi Yehuda's exemption, right? He thinks so. Now, the last thing we saw was that not only are they exempt from all these punishments, they're also exempt from mitzvot in general, which again, how far we take that, what Rabbi Yehuda means is a good question, or a subject of debate. So now the question is, where does he get it from? Amar Rav Shisha Bered Rav Edi, right? Because every time we brought his opinion, we had to show what's his source. My Talmud Rabbi Yehuda, right? And every time we're going to make these comparisons in the pasuk, once we have the previous one, we can add on to it this as well. Amar Kra, and here there's a mistake in the quoting of the pasuk. Instead of Ve'ela HaMitzvot, it should say V'zot HaMitzvah. This is from Deuteronomy, Dvarim, chapter 6, verse 1. V'zot HaMitzvah, HaChukim v'HaMishpatim. So now they say, what do you see here? Mishpatim, which we already excluded in the previous braita. If you're part of Mishpatim, then you're part of mitzvot and chukim. If you're not part of that, then you're not part of that. So if we don't judge you and you can't be judged and all that, then also you're not going to be part of mitzvot because of the Mishpatim in the same pasuk as the mitzvot. Now we get to a very famous line. We've seen this in Kiddushin, and particularly for women, it's a very relevant line. Amar Rav Yosef. And that's where we learned it when we talked about the exemption of women from time-bound commandments. Rav Yosef, who was blind, says, Reish hava amina. In the beginning, I said, Manta amar halakha Rabbi Yehuda da'amar suma patur min mitzvot ka'avidna yom tova l'Rabbanit. If anyone was to tell me that Rabbi Yehuda paskin, that we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, that a blind person is exempt from mitzvot, I'm going to make a huge celebration. My time, and what's the reason? To lo mipakdina velo avdina mitzvah, because I'm not commanded and yet I do mitzvot. So here, like, I'm going to get the best reward, because if I'm not commanded to do something and I do it anyway, wow, someone's going to pat me on the back very well. Like, wow, what an amazing thing you've done. However, but then I heard what Rabbi Chanina said. Rabbi Chanina, the exact opposite of what I thought. One who is commanded and does it is greater than the one who is not commanded to do it, meaning the reward that they get, the greatness of the mitzvah is a much greater mitzvah to do something when you're commanded to do it, right? I always bring the example of, when the parent tells a child, you have to do something, they never really want to do it. But child decides to do it on their own, much more, right? They want to do it more. And if you want to do it more, it's much easier to do it. It's much harder to do something that someone says you have to do and then do it anyway. So it's much more challenging because of the challenge. It's much harder to do it just because you're commanded. That's really for that you get more reward. Not that you don't get reward the other way. You just get more reward for doing it because you were commanded to do it. So Manda Amrli, and therefore once I heard Rabbi Chanina say this, I switched what I thought and I said, Manda Amrli ein halakha Rabbi Yehuda avdina yom tova l'Rabbanit. My time, then I said, oh, if you tell me the halakha is not like Rabbi Yehuda, I'll make a big celebration, because I'd rather be commanded a mitzvah and receive more reward. Again, I don't think he was so concerned with exactly how much reward he received. He was just trying to say, I want to do the best that I can do, and I want to be able to have the most potential. So that comes up in the sugya again for women being exempt from time-bound mitzvot, and therefore the reward for doing those mitzvot that they do anyway is less. Does it mean we shouldn't do them? Of course not, right? It just means that could be there's a certain, right, our level of, because we can opt in, right? So again, that's a whole question also for what mitzvot can women opt in, not opt in. This whole question there, again, that's not our topic for today, but interesting concept about, and makes, there is a lot of logic to that of if you can opt in, right? So opt in would do what you want, but your reward will not be the same as those who don't have the option. A new Mishna. So that was all just Rabbi Yehuda and his opinion about blind people that we got to in the context of the previous sugya, talking about boshet, and we saw the 3 different opinions about boshet. Rabbi Yehuda was one of them. Now we're going to get to a new Mishnah. So after we've established the 5 payments that you're supposed to pay, now the Mishnah just wants you to know, and we kind of know this already, that there's a difference between shor hamazik and adam hamazik, an animal that attacks and a person who attacks another person, which is exactly these 5 things. Adam mishalem nezek tzal ripo shevet uboshet u'mishalem t'mei vladot v'shor eno mishalem ela nezek u'patur m'dmei vladot. 2 main differences. In animal damages, they don't pay the 5 things. They only pay nezek. They just pay damages. They don't pay the shevet, the ripoy, the boshet, and the tzal. And also they don't pay if they cause a miscarriage to a woman. Whereas, and that comes from the Torah, there's this specific pasuk of the men who are fighting, one causes the miscarriage of the other's wife, and then he has to pay. Only a person who causes damage has to pay for the miscarriage, not an animal damages. By the way, apropos we saw talking about women and miscarriages, and we saw this case of the dog causing 2 cases of the dog causing 2 miscarriages. I happened to speak to someone over Shabbat who told me that there's a story told about her grandmother, and like they say it's true, that the grandmother miscarried due to a dog. I thought that was very interesting, and this is not so long ago that people, and she was young, it's like 18, and they said that apparently that's the story told for grandmother, that grandmother miscarried due to a dog. So anyway, I thought that was just interesting. Okay, so that's 2 differences. Now this Mishnah has a whole bunch of different halachot mixed in. Now we're going to talk about kim liable b'derabimine, and this we quoted already part of this Mishnah before. If you hit your parents but don't cause an injury, so right, no blood, then you're not liable the death penalty, and then you will have to pay damages. And where also there's no penalty in a court of humans, right? In the court of God, you'll be punished, karet, but not in the court of humans. And therefore, chayab b'kulan, you're going to have to pay all 5 things, right? Because assuming you did something, something that caused all 5 things, because there's no exemption based on the laws of kim liable b'derabimine that you're going to get the higher. But that's not relevant here because you didn't get a death penalty. And only at the end of the Mishnah, we're going to have the reverse case where there is a din of kimla. Hachovel be'eved ivri, but now we're getting off on other topics, and then we'll get back to this. If you wound a Jewish slave, and now let's say he's your own Jewish slave. So that what happens when you have a Jewish slave? The Jewish slave works for you. You make this, right? The salary he makes goes to you. And right, when he goes free, so then he's his own person. But while he's working for you, his salary goes to you. So if you injure him, you have to pay him all the payments for damages, except chutz min hashevet, because he works for you, so the salary goes to you, so you don't have to pay him for the loss of wages. The loss of wages is on you. Bizman shu shelo, if he's your own slave. Hachovel be'eved knani shel achirim, if you injure someone's Canaanite slave, which again is owned by the other master, chayab b'kulan. So first of all, they're a human, so you have to pay all the damages. And obviously, who do the damages go to, though? Not to the slave, because anything you give to the slave goes to the master. So you pay the master. Rabbi Yehuda omer ein la'avadim boshet. Again, he has this interesting, he seems to think all sorts of categories that people don't have boshet. He says, slaves, yes, you pay everything, but not the boshet. The humiliation doesn't go to slaves. They don't get a humiliation payment. Now we're going to talk about Reish, shoteh, katan, okay, or 3 categories of people who don't have halachic knowledge. So, pgiatan ra'ah. Okay, basically, if you hit them or you get hit by them, you're always on the underhand. Okay, meaning, hachovel behem chayav. If you injure them, you have to pay damages. V'hen shekavlu ba'achirim p'turim. But if they injure you, because we don't hold them accountable for their actions, because they don't really understand the ramifications of their actions, therefore they will be exempt. So that's what it means. You're pgiatan ra'ah. You're always on the underhand, because if you injure them, you have to pay, and if they injure you, they don't have to pay. And likewise, ha'eved v'ha'isha, a Canaanite slave and a woman, this is going to be slightly different, but also pgiatan ra'ah. Right now, it's going to sound the same, and we'll have to explain why. Hachovel behem chayav, if you injure a woman or a Canaanite slave, you have to pay. Now, remember, who do you pay? You pay the master of the slave and the husband of the woman, because she doesn't have her own money. And that's going to be the reason for the next halakha, which is Hem shechavlu ba'achirim p'turim. This is very interesting. You would think the master would have to pay for them, or the husband would have to pay for their damages. No, they don't. Okay? If they injure someone else, the master or the husband doesn't have to pay for them. Aval mishamim la'achar zman, but they do have to pay down the road. When is down the road? It's actually not a necessary. It's not necessarily going to happen. But if she gets divorced, or theoretically widowed, or if the slave goes free, which he's not supposed to be free, but if he is set free, then they have to pay, because then they have their own money. So here it's an issue that they don't own money, so therefore we can't make them pay. But if they do down the road, even if they don't own money now, but if they have money later, then they'll have to pay retroactively for what happened then. Now we get to the flip case of the previous one, right? Earlier we talked about kimle b'derabimine, cases where there is no kimle and you're going to have to pay. Now we're going to talk about cases where you get the death penalty and therefore exempt from payment. So if you injured your parents, then, or you injure someone on Shabbat, where at the moment you do the injury, you're also liable for the death penalty for doing a halakha on Shabbat. Patur mikulan, you're exempt from all the 5 things because you're now liable to get killed. And then we have kimle b'derabimine, you're not going to get 2 punishments for the exact same action. Again, this always happens when the action is the exact same thing that makes you liable both for the death penalty and for payment. And that's what happened in both these cases. And now we get to the other case about the Evet Knani. If you hit your own Evet Knani, then patur mikulan, then you're not going to have to pay anything because it would just be payment to yourself, right? Because the payment for an Evet Knani goes to the master. Well, you are the master, so you don't actually have to pay. Now we start off with the question in the Gemara, which eventually we're going to have a question against from our Mishna, and that's why it comes up in the sugya. And this is really going to take us till the end of today's daf. Ba'amine Rabbi Elazar mi Rav. Rabbi Elazar asked Rav the following question. Before we even start, who is Rabbi Elazar? He's Rabbi Elazar ben Pidat. He's the main student of, or his main rabbi is Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, and he's known to be the main student of Rabbi Yochanan. We've seen him all over. It's a little bit strange he's asking Rav a question, or so it seems, because Rav was living in Babylonia. Okay, Rabbi Elazar is 2nd generation, Rav is 1st generation, and he's living in Babylonia, not in Israel, and Rabbi Elazar was in Israel. Well, in fact, Rabbi Elazar started his career, started learning in Babylonia. He studied by Rav and Shmuel, so it's actually not strange at all. Okay, we just see him in many, many sugyot with Rabbi Yochanan, but in this case, he obviously studied the sugya first with Rav, and then later with Rabbi Yochanan. What's interesting about this is we're going to end our daf with the machlokes between Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan about exactly this issue. And Rabbi Elazar is going to be, the fact that he's kind of questioning Rav and pushing the other way, it's going to match actually what Rabbi Yochanan says later. I don't know the timing. I have to imagine Rabbi Elazar asked this to Rav before he studied with Rabbi Yochanan, but it's interesting that he ended up with the same opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. So Ba'amine Rabbi Elazar mi Rav. It never really says that Rabbi Elazar held the other way of Rav, but he does seem to be raising questions against him, which makes us seem that he disagreed with him. So Rabbi Elazar asked Rav the following question. If you injure the minor daughter of a man, so who does the payment go to? Here come the 2 sides. Now we've learned already, we're going to review some things we learned in Seder Nashim, which is that a woman, when she's a minor and a na'ara, the father has the rights to marry her off, to betroth her to somebody. And he gets the money of the kiddushin. And this is learned from a pasuk where it talks about actually hafarat nidarim, the fact that he can annul her vows. It says right off, husband and wife, a husband can annul the vows of the wife, and the father to the daughter. It says ben ish lishto, ben av lebito, bin ureha beit avia. When she is a na'ara in her father's home, that's when the father has the rights to annul the vows of his daughter. Now, bin ureha beit avia, what they say is, when she's a na'ara in the house of her father has monetary rights of hers. So that means that they're going to assume, if we learn it from there, that's why he can betroth her. And not only does he betroth her, but he gets the kesef kiddushin. He gets the money, right? Usually, right, in our day, it's a ring usually. That would go to the father if she was a minor. So, and even an na'ara, which is the in-between stage. When she's a Bulgarian, she's on her own. But before that, she's under her father's domain. So do we say the same thing then? If she gets injured, it goes to the father, just like that. Okay, so chaval anami dafu on my time. And now what would be the reason here? Well, it's all connected. Because when she gets injured, she's now lower in value. Now, either for the purposes of kiddushin, okay, he might get less kesef kiddushin for her because now she has this big injury, right? She is missing an arm. She might go lower in the value of what she could get for kiddushin. Or some people claim that we're talking about the fact that the father can sell his daughter to be a slave, okay, and that also it reduces her value. There's a big difference if you say it's not a big difference, but there is a difference, la halakha, if you say the sugya is talking about specifically the marriage issue, that he's going to decrease her value for the purposes of marrying or decrease her value for the purposes of being sold to be a slave, because this question Rabbi Elazar asks is about a ketana, not about a na'ara. Okay, a na'ara is those 6 months after she already hits puberty. If you say it all has to do with he's depreciating her value on the slave market, if she was to be sold to be a slave, he can only sell her to be a slave when she's a minor, not when she's a na'ara. And then it wouldn't be relevant at all for a na'ara. And then there would be no question. It would obviously go to her. But if you say it's talking about the kesef kiddushin, now he can betroth his daughter and get the money even when she's a na'ara. And then the question would not only be for a ketana, it would also be for a na'ara. So that's just a relevance of how we understand this. Just it's an issue that commentaries debate about what he decreased, right? This wound will decrease her value for what? Okay, but either which way, it has something to do with, let's just assume it has to do with betrothal. Since he can betroth her, therefore, and now her value gets decreased, then the injury money should go to him. That's one side. Oh, Dilma, or do we say, Shevach Neurim Hu Da'achne Lerachman? What rights does he have to the kesef kiddushin? Shevach neurim means the money of the kiddushin. Well, it's because he can decide who she marries, basically. Okay, this is always a hard thing for us to swallow. But again, this was only if he betroths her under the age of being a bogeret, right, which is usually around 12 and 6 months. So if he betroths her, he can choose. If he wants to choose to sell her to a mukat shchin, okay, to marry her off to a mukat shchin, which is, he's going to get a lot less money for that kind of thing, he can decide that. So it's up to him to, take less money, more money, and therefore he gets the rights to that money. And by the way, this then would not be learned from Binu'eh Beit Avia. This would be learned from the pasuk by the Motzu Shemra, which is Et biti natati leish hazeh. When he goes and claims, the guy claims she's not a virgin. So the father comes and makes a claim for his daughter and says, my daughter I gave to this man. And basically we see from there, it's something we learned in Kiddushin, it also shows he gets the kesef kiddushin, but then it's just kiddushin in that. Binu'eh Beit Avia is a more general thing, saying while she's in Arash, she's in her father's house, which seems to mean, he'll get her money, he'll be in charge of her finances. But if you use this word, this phrase, if say that's where we see in the Torah that the father can betroth his daughter, see all the laws from there, and then he'll get the money. That's because he's in control of that. Now, when it comes to Chabala, when it comes to an injury, he doesn't have the rights to go punch her in the face, right? Thank God, right? In some cultures, people think that fathers do have the right to beat their children. He doesn't have the right to beat his daughter. And therefore, lo kanyale rachmana, the Torah gave him no rights to the money for this. So that's the question. Is this like Kiddushin? Is Kiddushin just an outgrowth of the fact that an Ara is in her father's house and therefore anything she gets, like money for getting wounded, would go to the father? Or do we say, no, there's a difference between Kiddushin, that's Kiddushin money, that he can control, and that we have a pasuk that shows he can control that, therefore we're going to let him get the money for that, but not things he has no control over that aren't connected to him at all. So that's the question. To which, starting now from Amabet, Rav answers the question. Amrle, lo zikta Torah la'av ela shevach neurim bilvad. Rav says he doesn't get the money to her injuries. No, the Torah gave him rights, kesef kiddushin alone. Okay, this is limiting the power of the father over a minor daughter. Injury money would not go to her. ATV. So question number one, Rabbi Elazar is going to throw at him. Our Mishnah. What does our Mishnah say? HaChovel be'eved ivri. Okay, it doesn't sound connected, but let's see. HaChovel be'eved ivri, a Jewish slave, chayav b'kulan chutz min hashevet, bizman shu shelo. Yeah. In Eved Ivri, the shevet doesn't go to the master. Why? Because right? Everything else does, but the shevet doesn't because his salary anyway goes to the master. So if the master hits his own Eved Ivri, right, then he doesn't have to pay shevet because the shevet is his own. So likewise with the girl. What do we know about a girl? A girl gets fed by her father, and in exchange, all her salary goes to the father. So we shouldn't have to pay her shevet, right? If someone were to injure her now, let's plug it in. Someone injures her, and she now can't work. Whose loss is it? It's not her loss. Her salary goes to the father. The father's going to still support her and give her food, and he's not going to get the salary money. So the father should get compensated for the shevet. So Amar Abaye model Rav b'shevet ma'aseh ad shapagrut avu. Abaye says, yeah, when Rav said that he doesn't, the payment for any damages to this girl go to her, not the father, what he meant was the nezek, the tsar, the ripoy, and the boshet. Yeah, the shevet payment, I agree. Of course, her salary will go, assuming she's a nara or a ktana, right? Once she's a bogeret, she makes her own money, and she pays for her own food. But as long as she's working for the father, yes, of course, he'll get her shevet. But that's not what he was saying. I was referring to all the other payments. Second question, Eitive. This is going to be from a braita, and we're going to answer in the same way, but then we're going to have a big problem with this braita because of a different braita. So Eitive, okay, now we're going to have a few different cases in this braita. If you injure your older son, okay, this is also interesting in terms of domestic abuse. So if you injure your older son, yitain lo miyad, you have to pay him right away. We'll see in a minute what this means right away. Bibno katan, if it's a minor son, doesn't really have his own money, yaselo skula, you buy something that's going to have, you put the money into, it's almost like saying you put the money into an investment account or a savings account, and that way it'll gain. Okay, we're going to see exactly. I don't want to translate this too much right now because the very end of our sugya, we're going to ask what is a skula exactly, and we'll see. But it's something that's going to make money, okay, bear interest in our words that we would say it, because the son doesn't have his own. Now we understand what the miyad is. If the son is old enough or ready to have his own money, so you pay. If he's not old enough, you buy something like a trust. You put the money in a trust and you wait till he gets old. Hachovel b'bito ktana patur. Okay, if you injure your younger daughter, though, you're exempt. What do you see here, right? But so number one, you're exempt, which would be weird. You would have to pay her according to what we said. And you'd say, okay, well, that wasn't your own daughter. We were talking, what if someone else injured? Where would the money go? Well, that's what it says here. The braita ends with other people who injure her have to give to the father. Seems like it goes to the father, not to the daughter. And that's why if he injures her, he'd be exempt because anyway, it would go to him. So that seems to totally disagree with what Rav said. And these are questions Rabbi Elazar throws at Rav. That's why it seems like Rabbi Elazar probably disagrees with Rav, to which Rav answers again, hachanami b'shevet. I was talking about the shevet payment, not the rest of the payments. Okay, I'm sorry, I was talking about the rest of the payments, not shevet. This braita is talking about shevet. Okay, the salary, since her salary anyway goes to the father, so the salary payment, the fact that she has to sit in bed right now, is going to go to the father. All the rest of the payments, they'll go directly to her. Now we're going to go off topic a little, not exactly off topic, but we're going to start asking a question on this braita that we just read and say this braita contradicts a different braita. And then from here till close to the end of the daf, we're going to deal with these two braitot and try to resolve some contradictions between them. So the first question they're focusing on is bino gadol yitain lo miyad. If a man injures his son, he has to pay him. Uriminu. This contradicts another braita, and I put the two braitot in the chart on the page so you can see the issues between them and then the resolution. If somebody injures your children who are older already, whether it's boys or whether it's girls, if you injure their older children, you have to pay them right away. If it's minor children, so then you pay money to the father and you put it into a trust for them for later. But here comes the problematic line in this braita. Bibanav ubnotav shelo patur. But if you injure your own children, and here it seems like minors or not minors, you're exempt. Okay, this sounds like domestic abuse is okay, right? You don't have to pay. I mean, again, whether it's okay or not is a different question, but the fact that you're exempt, right, means it might be it's forbidden to do, but you don't actually have to pay money. Okay, I don't think anyone would really think it's okay. However, you don't have to pay money. So this contradicts, okay, this contradicts a whole bunch of different points in that braita because it's both girls and boys. And, but the main thing we're focusing right now is bibno gadol. It sounds like if you injure your own son, you have to pay him according to the braita we saw. And this braita said you injure your older son, you're exempt. So amri lo kasha. We're now going to say, well, it all depends on whether you're supporting your children or not. If you're supporting your children and then you injure them, okay, so again, you shouldn't be doing that. But if you do it, you're not going to have to pay because you're paying their food. If you don't pay for their food and they're not being supported by you, then you have to pay them. And they have their own independent expenses and you have to pay them. So now we're going to have to try to see, does this really work, this resolution? Because let's look at some of the details in the braita. So first they're going to question the ukimta on the first braita, and then they're going to question on the second. So b'ma kibta lekamaita. The first braita you said is b'she'ein smuchin al shulchano. The first braita is a case where they're not eating, right? They don't eat at your table, meaning you don't support them. Ihachi em aseifa. Well, then we have a problem with the last line of that braita. What does it say? Hachovel b'bito ktana patul. If someone, right, hits their own daughter, their minor daughter, you're exempt. And velod ela charim shechavlu ba chayavim litein la'avia. And other people who injure her, the money goes to the father. Now, what did we just say? It's when he's not supporting her. So if he's not supporting her, then why should he get her injury money, right? Ledida bai lemeitav la debaya mizone. She needs money to pay for food. So of course, in other words, let's just play it out. If he doesn't support her, normally her salary goes to the father in exchange for money. If he doesn't support her, then her salary goes to herself. So the salary should go to her. And that's what we said. This is all about the salary. The salary that she's now losing should go to her because she needs to buy food. And afilu lemanda amar. Now, if you want to say, maybe he could say to her, listen, you have to work for me. The salary goes to me, but I'm not supporting you. Well, you can't do that with your daughter. Okay, so now we're going to say, if you want, you have an Eved Knani living in your house, you actually have the rights, even though you shouldn't really do this, but you have the rights to say, you work for me, I get your salary, but I'm not going to feed you. Okay, you can do this to a Caananite slave. That's only be'eved ivri. You can only do this for a Caananite slave. You could say to him, Amarle, you could say to him, you work all day for me, I get the money. And in the evening, go knock on doors and beg for food. And you have the rights to do that. Okay, again, they don't promote this kind of thing and say this is what you should do, but technically speaking, if you did that, it's okay. Aval, eved ivri, but a Jewish slave. Dichtiv, ki tov lo imach, you might remember this. Right? This is when the slave says, I want to stay with you because it's good for me with you. They learn from there. You have to feed him along with you. You have to make it good for him. You have to feed him. You can't not feed an Eved Ivri. So, lo kol sheken bito, right? So all the more so, if an Eved Ivri was living in your house, you can't say, I get your salary and you pay for the food. No, if you take his salary, you pay for food. Therefore, all the more so his daughter, if you take her salary, you have to pay for food. Now, in this case, if she's not eating and you don't eat her, you're not giving her food, then of course she gets to keep her salary. So why, if that first braita is talking about a case where she's not eating in your house, then the salary should go to her. And then it should have said, other people, shechavluba, give to her and not to the father. So why is it going to the father? Well, as he said in a different place, lo nitzorcha ela lahadafa. We're talking about ha'adafa here. I'll explain that in a minute. Ha'chanami, likewise here, lo nitzorcha ela lahadafa. We're talking about the extra, meaning, if let's say she makes a high salary and it more than covers her food, so if the father says, I'm not supporting you, you go work for yourself, make your own money for your food. If she makes more money, since she's a minor, the extra money goes to the father. So what this is talking about a case where his daughter makes a high salary, it more than covers her food, the extra money goes to her father, and therefore if someone injures her, or if he injures her, so the base money of what she's missing of her salary, she's going to need to cover her food costs, he'll have to pay her, or whoever hits her is going to have to pay her. But in anything in addition to that goes to the father, okay? So that either if he did the hitting, he would be exempt, and if someone else did it, they would give it actually to the father. So that's the only way we can explain this braita, otherwise it doesn't make any sense. Now we're going to go to the second braita. The second one, braita, don't get confused, it's not braita. Braita is the second one, okay? Kamma is the first and the braita is the last. So the second braita, you said it's besmuchin al shulchano. It's when they live in his house and he supports them. And what does it say there? So again, if you look at the chart, you can easily flip back from one braita to the other. Gedolim yitain lahem miyad, it said, right? The older ones get immediately. You pay them. Ktanim yaseh lahem skula. Okay, this is someone hits someone else's children. So the payment goes straight to them. Now, if they're smuchin al shulchano, right? Now, what was the issue? The issue was banavu bunotav patur. If it's your own children, you're exempt. Why are you exempt? Because they eat at your table. So basically, what you would pay in shevet, the loss of salary goes to you because they work for you, because their salary goes to you and you pay them food. But the beginning part doesn't make any sense. Why, if someone else attacks, hits your children, the father should get the payment. If they're eating at your table. So, Amre ki kakapi b'midi de kachaser. This is very interesting. B'midi de atame alma lo kapir. We're now going to say the father, and now you have to kind of say, you must be talking about damages here. If the kid gets beaten up and ends up with damages and a whole bunch of extra costs, right? Extra payments that they weren't expected to get, right? So now the father if he gives them money, then what he wants to get in exchange is things that would have been a loss for him. But something that comes as like extra that he doesn't care about, you can keep it, okay? Because that wasn't something that was coming to him anyway. Okay, and that's why it goes to the children. This payment for damages, the sa'al, the boshet, all those extra payments, that's like an extra. So that goes to the children. So they say, wait a minute. But wait, there's a different sugya that contradicts this. If a kid finds something on the street, whether they're young or older, if they live in the father's house and they find like a diamond ring on the street and it's nobody's and they can't figure out whose it is, they get to keep it. And that's a case of me'al maka'atelehu, right? It just came out of the blue. Well, in Bava Mitzia, it says, if you live in your father's house and he feeds you, you have to give it to him. Why? It's actually an interesting halakha, because it will cause the father to possibly have enmity between you and the father, mishum eva, because he'll say, what? I give you food all the time. You found this thing and you're keeping it for yourself. We don't want to cause tension in the house. So that's a case to be al makatu v'kakapid, and he does insist on getting it himself, right? We assume the father gets that because we assume the father's going to get angry about it. So why wouldn't we say the same thing about this Kabbalah, right? That the father will get angry and say, why are you keeping the money for the injury? I should get it. So they add, right? This is all just logical and psychological, really. If the kid just finds something on the street and there was no pain for the kid in finding it, well, then the father will say, this should go to me. This belongs to me. I'm your father. But if all of a sudden some unexpected payment comes in on account of the fact that the child got injured and had to go through physical struggle, they got beaten up, well, then the father's going to say, fine, you can have that money because you almost like you worked for it, right? You got hurt. Okay, so now they say, wait a minute. So we make this distinction now. If it's tsar to the body, then the father is going to say, okay, you can have it. Well, now we got to go back to the first braita. Okay, it's a little bit confusing here because we keep going back and forth. But ha-hatam, in the other one, ji'it la tsara degufa, the girl suffers, ume'alma ka'atala, and it comes from out of the blue, v'kakapid. In the first sugya, what happened? It said, ha'chovel b'bito ktana, or achirim shechavlu ba chayav litein la'aviyah, goes to the father. Now she suffered. She got beaten up, and it goes to the father. Dekatane, right, below, and it says also, lo od ela chirim shechavlu ba chayavim litein la'aviyah, it goes to the father. Amre, they say, wait, that's different. Why is that different? Now, it's not really different, but this is a very interesting answer. It all depends on who the father is. And we want to figure out what the father is willing to give up on and what he's not willing to give up on. Well, it will sort of depend on what the temperament of that father is and what his attitude is about toward his children. Now, we already distinguished between the first braita and the second braita. Then in the first braita, which is the one we're looking at right now, he doesn't let them eat at his table. And in the second braita, he does. So that obviously shows a different type of father. Amrei hatam digavra kapdanahu. He's obviously a bit of a guy who's stingy with his money. Because he doesn't even let his own children eat at his table. And there are clearly minor children in there because they talk about the minors and the older ones. Even something where it wasn't expected and the kids suffered for it, he also wants to get the money for it. And therefore, it's going to go to him. But but in the second braita, where he's not like that, because he lets them eat at his table, then we're going to make this distinction between a case where he's losing money and a case where he's not losing money. And that's how we get to this whole distinction between the two braita. Okay, so it was a little bit convoluted till we were able to actually resolve the differences between these two braitot, and they're talking about different situations and different types of people. Those who feed their children and those who say their children, go fend for yourselves. That obviously shows a different type of personality to then affect how they view, if their kids get beaten up, who the money is going to go to. What's clear here is that the father kind of has the right to either say, I'm giving up on this right. The father, it seems like, really has a right to the money. But the question is, do we just assume the father is giving up on it in some of the cases and not in the other? Okay, now we're going back to the earlier part where we talked about this skula. And I said, we get back to this. What is this skula? What are you supposed to buy for this minor child? Right, where do you put the money? Rav Chisda Sefer Torah. It's something, this is why I said I was a little hesitant to call it a trust account or something like that, because they don't really view it as a trust account. It's something that bears fruit. Now, what's the bearing fruit of the Torah? Well, it'll teach the child. He'll have a book that he can learn from, a Sefer Torah that will, not just a book, but the Sefer Torah, which will help him to learn. It's investment for the future, right? An education investment. Rabbi Rav Huna Amal, a financial investment. Dikla da'achil minei tamre. You buy him a palm tree, which will grow fruits, and then he'll have produce and he'll be able to sell them, right? It'll make more money than it's worth. Okay, now back to the beginning. Rabbi Elazar, the beginning of this section, Rabbi Elazar asked Rav the following question. Does the money go to the father? Does the money go to the daughter? And Rav said the money goes to the daughter. It's not like Kesef Kiddushin. To which Reish Lakish said just like Rav. Okay, in this, right, so we had at the same time period, we have Rav debating it with Rabbi Elazar, and then we move to Eretz Yisrael, and Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan are going to debate this issue as well. Lo zikta Torah la'av ela shevach neurin bilvad. Reish Lakish said just like Rav, the father only gets rights to the money of Kiddushin. For Rabbi Yochanan amar afilu p'tziah. Rabbi Yochanan said even petza. Petza is like a small wound, a bruise. So the Gemara says p'tziah sakadatach afilu Rabbi Elazar lo kamibayle ela chabala de'afchatemi kasba. A p'tziah is like just a little bruise. What? Rabbi Elazar didn't ask this question. He was talking about a p'tziah. He was talking about a chabala, like a real injury where she is reduced in value. That was his whole question. Where it reduces her value, in the marriage market. So in the end, they're going to say, we'll get to that tomorrow, but maybe we'll just continue. About he wasn't even asking about that, to which Amar Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina. Now, what we mean is a bruise to her face, where that will actually decrease her value. In other words, it have to be he's talking about a decrease in value. The main point here is that Rabbi Yochanan thinks that it goes to the father because it does reduce her value in his ability to betroth her. Okay, and therefore they're connected. Whereas Rav and Reish Lakish didn't view them as connected. So quick review of today's stuff. We started with the Rabbi Yehuda approach about blind people. Again, we said it's not exactly accepted halakha by most authorities, although there are certain things that come up in the halakha about it. Interesting to look into. Then we had the famous statement about Kadola mitzvah oseh mimishe no mitzvah oseh. One who's commanded, it gets more reward than one who's not commanded. Then we got into this Mishna, which compared a bunch of different things, an Adam mazik and a shor mazik, an animal who damages versus a person, and the differences between them. When we have kim lebi, when we don't, and who gets the payment if it's an eved, if it's a woman, if it's a slave, right? And what the difference between a shoteh katan, a woman, and a slave, if they injure versus if they get injured, and different halachot about that. And then we had this big question of Rabbi Elazar of Rav about where the money goes, to the father or to the daughter. And Rav said it goes to the daughter, and then Rabbi Elazar threw some questions at him, and from there we got into this whole contradiction between two different braitot. How do we resolve them? Okay, and then we just answered what is the skula, and then we saw that Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan debate this issue that Rav, to him it was clear, Reish Lakish agrees with him, but Rabbi Yochanan has the other approach that actually goes to the father. with that, I wish everyone a good week and hoping for good news this week.